baby. We are live. Welcome to another edition of the Rockball Report podcast. I'm just catching up on the comments in the chat already. I love it, guys. And of course, where else would I rather be than right here, right now? After the weekend we had, after the game we watched, why wouldn't I show up here for a podcast? I think the more jarring question for everybody is, why is Drew in such a good mood? Why isn't it fire and brimstone? And why isn't he screaming and smashing things in the studio? I'll tell you why. Maybe it's personal growth. Maybe it's a little bit of sobriety, which I'll fix here in a second. But ultimately, I don't feel as devastated as I think I might otherwise. Chris, if you can go ahead and turn that up in my headphones real quick. Guys, thank you for everybody who's here. You know, I'm going through the comments. Super Mexican, draft more refs and pay them well or continue to suffer the consequences. Yes, guys, we're here and we survived. If you're here, it means you survived. Look, Mike Partham, who was at my house and got to witness me in almost full tilt. Yeah, Mike, it got much worse after you left. And in fact, for those of you here, we talked about it during the absolute abomination of a podcast that was more like batting practice for this one that we recorded probably about a half hour ago. Here's what I love. I texted Chris at 3 a.m. an SAT word, right? I used the word ruminate while I was standing drunk and shirtless in my kitchen. And here's what I'll say to you. There's an episode of Cops where there's a shirtless idiot trying to talk to the cops about how high his IQ is. That's who you are when you use the word ruminate at 3 o'clock in the morning when everyone knows you're about 10 drinks in. Oh, there it is, Andrew Barber. It's the nihilism, right? It's this thing of, like, today at work, I made a funny comment to somebody because they were like, well, man, here's to hoping for next year. I go, wait a minute, whoa, hope? Hope? No. Hope is terrible. Why would anything good happen? Like, why would anything good happen? That's not good. We can use braces money to pay the rest. Yeah, see the catharsis, it's real. And that's why after you get eliminated from the NFL season, you still show up for the podcast. Because if not, what are we even doing here, Chris?
I don't know. I'd be shocked if everybody's numbers across the board go down. I mean, I myself stayed away from the national media, all my national shows that I follow. I just had to decompress for 48 hours, and now I'm good. We're into off-season content, and you know what that means. Let me go right to the camera right now. It's off-season mode. Please send us your mock drafts on X at Rockpile Report. Drew loves mock drafts. Send us your mocks.
Oh, God. Send me your mocks. Send me your quarterback hand size charts. I want all of it. Let it rain down on me. Just give it to me, right? I'm in the right headspace for it. So I was thinking about this after the game this weekend as I kind of imbibed in fact, during the last podcast, I kind of ruminated on the idea that Wyoming whiskey really is it's a solid title for a podcast because, I mean, it's what's getting us through this, right? The whiskey out of Wyoming. It's the thing that is the salve for our wounds. The fact that a thing came out of Wyoming and solved all of our problems and then also gave us a bunch of new ones, which we'll talk about here tonight. Guys, we're here to talk about things we can learn. And I guess what gave me the idea for the podcast was I saw a bunch of demotivational posters. Like, I'm a huge fan of them. I don't know what you guys think, but I've always gotten a kick out of them where it's like, you know, like it's a guy crashing inside of a wave, and it's like, or like, well, what's the one? It's like optimists, and there's, or what is it? It's like realists, the only one who knows, the only people who really know what's going on, and it's a glass half empty, glass half full. Like there's 3 glasses full of yellow liquid, and one's saying I'm half empty, and one's saying I'm half full, and the third one's going, this is piss. It doesn't matter. That's where we are. We are the glass full of piss here in the. in the demotivational poster. But then, Chris, there was this one, and it's maybe one of my favorites, and it's something that I plan on putting up at my desk this week because I think it's a lesson that everybody needs to understand, that not all pain is gain. right? There's a lot of suffering that we endure as sports fans. And that doesn't mean that it's all going to go well. It doesn't mean it's going to pan out. This concept that some people have of like, well, we suffered for long enough, and if you just hang around, it'll get better because X, Y, and Z and all these nice things will pile up. And the reality is that's just not that's not how anything in life works. Like suffering, sometimes you just suffer and suffer in circles until you die. That's reality. Not all pain is gain. And yet here with the Buffalo Bills, with that in mind, you know, Sean McDermott went to the podium and made a lot of people angry after this game because he said, well, you know, we'll learn from this. And it set the internet on fire because there's people who hold it against him. And guys, I drove the train. I feel like I was one of the people at the forefront of the I hate the Sean McDermott head coach train. And so if I'm the one trying to throw the brakes on things, I think everybody should take a deep breath, reflect on how they got to their current emotional state, and then pour a small sip of whiskey and say it with me, Chris. Goose Fraba. You all need to calm down. Tonight's show is dedicated to talking about that dynamic and the fact that everyone is all fired up at Sean McDermott, fired up at the coaching staff. It's fire and brimstone. And I, as one of the members of the lunatic fringe of this fan base, the hyperbolic, the overreactive, if I'm not where you are, you can probably just take a deep breath, calm down, and try to meet me in the middle. Try. And if by the end of this podcast you don't feel it, you can DM me and tell me to go to hell. You can stop watching, listening. You can do whatever you want. It's a free country. I just ask that you lend me your ears as we talk about the lessons from the 2024-2025 season that the Buffalo Bills can hopefully take away from this. And I don't think it's just lip service. I legitimately think that Sean McDermott means it. And he has every right to. Because if you think about it, over the course of his career, Chris, when he said, hey, we're going to learn from this, how many times has he not delivered? Like last year, we lost, 2023, we lose to Philadelphia. And he goes, we're going to learn from this. Don't worry. And everyone, then they go into the bye week, and it's all of the snark. Snark was at an all-time high. And then we come out, and we wrestle back control of the AFC East for a third consecutive, or that was the fourth consecutive year, Chris? The four-peat?
Something like that. I've lost count.
Because we didn't lose again for the rest of the season. And it came because we played better on the offensive line. We played with more intensity on the offensive and defensive fronts. And they refocused, and they won the division after everyone was counting them out. They almost swept the division. You know, the season after season, when you go back, we swept it this year. If it wasn't for the game we benched our starters. After 2 straight years that saw us split games with the Jets and the Dolphins, respectively. And after losing on Monday Night Football in New York City, where Aaron Rodgers hilariously tore his Achilles, Sean McDermott took to the podium and said, hey, we're going to learn from that one. Did they or did they not rattle off wins after that?
True.
When has Sean McDermott lied to you and said, we're going to learn from this, and the team didn't take something away? And for the people who are like, he hasn't learned anything. But the only thing that he has not learned over his 7 years, 8 years as our head coach is how to get over Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, and Steve Spagnuolo. Get in line. Get in line. Every single active offensive coordinator in the NFL right now has lost to Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes.
Didn't Lou Anarumo beat the Ravens and Mahomes?
He's a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, okay.
But so my point is...
But where is he now?
I want to talk about offensive...
Not with the Bengals.
Not with the Bengals. And this is my point. Like, every coach in the AFC has at some point in their career lost to Andy Reid. That's what happens when you're around for long enough. And so in that way, when people go, oh, you should learn faster, I got nothing for you. If you want to wallow in that, it is a free country. I can't stop you. What I can do is I can point out all the ways that this franchise can right itself and genuinely take things away from this season. What they hopefully learn going into next that they learned this year. I want to start with some quick hitters just to get us into the flow of this. Spencer Brown. Spencer Brown had an amazing season after years of detritus from this fan base, myself included. Like, I remember calling Brandon Beane an idiot for not going out and getting him competition at right tackle. Who looks dumb now? I mean, it's always me. Let's face it. It's this podcast. It is always going to be me. Despite a final subpar game of the season against Kansas City, he is on his way to being one of the top right tackles in the entire NFL. But in this game, where we thought he would shine, he struggled, especially against rushers who, George Karlaftis is not a great power rusher. He's got finesse and he's got moves and he's got technique. And you watched that the fact that they would put him in conflict and make him question where the rush was going to come from, it really did throw him completely off of his game. I want to see that Spencer Brown can continue to build on what was an amazing 2024 season by learning, maybe getting better awareness, maybe watching a little more tape and understanding like, hey, I'm going to get tested on this shoulder by they're going to show me a blitz and then drop out of it. Meanwhile, Karlaftis already has my shoulder. Those are the types of nuanced things that I think it took Deion Dawkins a little while to get. But once he got him, he became one of the best tackles in all of football. Spencer Brown's on his way there. We just have to hope that he can continue to steer into this. I also think Damar Hamlin and Cole Bishop have things that they can learn and take away from because again, the concept of tonight's show is what can we learn from 2024 and genuinely take into 2025? This one might be for the coaches, honestly. Because I think that if you look at the safety position, years of trying to preemptively replace Prime, Poyer, and Hyde has largely failed. You drafted Hamlin, Jaquan Johnson, and Saron Neal. Bishop hasn't seen a fair shake yet, so I'm not going to involve him in that conversation. You brought in Cam Lewis as a UDFA and a former first-round pick in Lewis Seen. You paid Taylor Rapp and Mike Edwards in free agency. And yet you still don't have your preeminent safety talent. I think that this coaching staff is going to have to take a hard look at this position and what they do. Dan Orlovsky, I guess, was making comments today about how the Bills actually need more help in the back seven than the front seven. Now, I think that's... I don't agree. But at the same time, it's worth noting that it's not like for lack of trying. They've been trying to solve the safety thing. But they've been doing it with subpar athletes and cheap kind of throw-in free agents. Cole Bishop represents the biggest thing they've done to try to address safety, since they signed Poyer and Hyde back in 2017?
Yeah.
So with that in mind...
How many safeties have we drafted that have failed as to be... These guys are next in line after Poyer and Hyde's age comes into play. I
love that spin in the comments. I like McD as a coach. I just wish he changed his defensive scheme. I can't wait. Stick around. You're not going to want to miss this part of the conversation. I think that what this coaching staff needs to do is take a look at the archetype of player that they're putting back there at safety. And they need to say to themselves, look, we've tried this over and over again. We keep trying to go for the guy who has limited athleticism, but has it between the ears, we think, has aggressiveness and is willing to play. And we think we can get by with that because we're paying out to fill out so many other positions. But you got to stop looking at it like that. They have to get a solution, at least at free safety, because Cole Bishop might go on to be your starting strong safety. But you got to find an answer for a deep safety, someone who you trust to play with instincts and range and then drop into the box and run support and fill on short passes. It's going to be hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but they have to at least have that thought after watching a year where they didn't have Poyer, they didn't have a Hyde, and they came into the season with what they thought was a really good plan at safety, and it was a mixed bag. I also think that guys like Osiris Torrance and Dorian Williams, if you want to take anything away from this season for those two, consistency. Just find your consistency. Dorian Williams would show you one good pass cover, like zone rep. He'd show you one good one for every 2 to 3 mediocre ones. Osiris Torrance, in pass pro, was everything his draft profile said he would be. Now, he's again turning into a very good guard, and he had some clutch plays for the team this season. The first time we beat Kansas City at home. Torrance, down the stretch, made a handful of all-star plays against Chris Jones, of all people, to ice the game for Buffalo. He still has to finish himself as a product, and the coaching staff has to work to finish him as a pass protector. If they can do that, this team will already be ahead of the sticks going into 2025. Staying with players, Josh Allen. Josh Allen, there's things he can take away from this. And Chris, stop me if I'm wrong here. Are you sick and tired of watching Josh Allen just get mauled in these games and then come away with these injuries where he's like, oh yeah, my throwing hand got kind of crunched up in there at the end of the game, but
Yes.
Here's what I know. He needs to be more judicious with his running. And I know that sounds stupid. Every fan is going to go, you can't take his legs away. I'm not asking for that. What I'm asking is for him to be judicious. I want Josh Allen to take a look back at his 2024 season. And I want him to ask the question, what would have happened if I didn't break my hand week 1? The broken hand that he played with all season long. What would have happened if I hadn't absolutely got concussed? Chris, let's call a spade here. He got concussed in that Houston Texans game.
Yeah.
He got leveled, and then he was wobbly afterwards. Patriots, week 16, he gets a neck and elbow stinger in the same game, and he's admitting, or against the San Francisco 49ers, when he goes, oh yeah, I just hit my elbow and my hand went numb for 5 minutes. It's fine. No, it's not fine. We need you to be here. We need you to be able to grip it and rip it. And the problem is, these injuries are coming after he's sustained UCL damage, AC joint injuries the last 2 years, a foot injury in 2021 against Tampa. Relying on Josh Allen to be a human battering ram is going to have the exact effect you'd think it would if you make somebody a human battering ram. There's a reason that you don't pay super physical Brandon Jacobs style running backs. So why would you relegate your quarterback to being that guy? I think that Josh has to, and the coaching staff have to get together and find a way to be more judicious, not get away from it, but be more judicious with how they use his legs and they use his physicality, and when and where they decide to use him as a human battering ram. Because the net effect of all that contact, it's every year now that he's dealing with some long-term season-long injury, and it's really frustrating. So far, it hasn't hampered his ability to provide splash plays. But what happens when it does, Chris? You can kiss your Super Bowl goodbye. For everybody who's like, well, we need this in order to win. What happens when it costs you Josh? What happens when I would like to see Josh grow from this season in the way that he goes out there and challenges the coaching staff a little. Understanding his own gravitas and understanding what he brings to the table, he goes out there and challenges these coaches to develop a quality short yard rushing plan. Say, look, maybe it's a bad idea to roster a fullback who's literally only useful on offense when he's grabbing my butt cheeks and pushing me forward. I need help. I need a legitimate up back. It doesn't mean you have to go out and get Patrick or Patrick Ricard from the Ravens, but you have to get something. And in that way, I think he can defer to and kind of work this out with Joe Brady. Joe Brady's next on my short list of people who we want to analyze and talk about and kind of figure out what he can take away from this, especially the way the season ended, and extrapolate that on into next season. I think in the words of Von Miller, don't blink. Don't blink if you're Joe Brady. In Joe Brady's first professional season as a full-time play caller, we watched him grow from week 1 to ultimately the AFC Championship game. And we saw the ups and we saw the downs. We saw the best of him and we saw the worst of him. And the fact that this season got him a giant uptick in head coach interviews from where he was the last coaching cycle. But again, this is his second time now being involved in a coaching cycle. It's only a matter of time before he gets hired by someone. He's on the right path to promotion in the NFL. He went from a guy who was calling trick plays at just the worst possible moment to a guy who hammered playoff caliber teams with a great rushing attack and knew and had a feel for how to mix in bunch formations to create separation for a group of wide receivers that Literally don't. None of them, to a man, have that in their skill set naturally. Finally, at a high stakes matchup, biggest spot of the entire season, comes up against the best offensive coordinating coach in the NFL, the best defensive coordinator doing it in the league in terms of coordinating, and even with a force of nature at quarterback, rookie mistakes that Brady made in that game will have his team golfing rather than playing in the Super Bowl. What he needs to learn is to sometimes just take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and understand that the answers to guys like Zach Orr and Steve Spagnuolo and all the hurdles that they put in front of you are right there. You just have to see them with a little bit better anticipation and a little bit better planning. In this game against the Kansas City Chiefs, for instance, you go into that game having just hammered the Ravens on the ground. The number 1 and number 2 defenses in DVOA against the run. You ran the hell out of the ball against them. And then you went into a game against the Chiefs and they made you take the cheese. They said, hey, we're going to take away the run. And you tried some fancy draws. You tried some cute stuff with Ty Johnson early out of passing formations. But hey, we're going to call a running back draw at a shotgun. And it just blows up in your face. But you had a James Cook who was averaging 6 yards a touch. Now, he did get hurt. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you go away from the run. Ty Johnson has proven to you he can run explosively and seal games for you. Ray Davis has proven he can give you a spark when you let him. And instead, they just absolutely shied away from the run. And to a point Chris made during our earlier train wreck of a podcast, they passed the ball 3 times in their final set of downs.
Yeah. You had 3:33 left on the clock. You wanted that to be the last drive of the game, so you would think run the ball, but James Cook was injured, and then apparently all of a sudden Sean McDermott does not trust Ray Davis.
But I don't know if it's Sean McDermott. I wonder if that's just Joe Brady going, hey, don't worry, they're giving me the pass. I'm going to take it. If the thing you should take away from this is if Steve Spagnuolo looks like he's giving you something, it's rare that it's actually going to be open post-snap. So you have to learn that that's not a place you can go. And I think that with that, this entire team moves forward a giant step with just Joe Brady recognizing, like this, Chris, this was his first matchup against the best of the best. It's not shocking. You know, same thing with Bobby Babich. You went up against the best. The team that only one group of people beat all season long, and it was you. You guys were the ones that beat them. You can't, it's hard to do that twice, especially when they are the best right now in terms of coach, quarterback, and coordinators.
They're what I like to call the gold chains of football.
And so with that in mind,
chains out.
I just think that he needs, he needs to understand the dynamic of if it looks like they're giving me something, I have to understand it won't be there. He also has to understand that here's what Casey's done. Also, like he has to realize and dial into this idea that here's what Casey's done so far this season. And if you make your game plan about that, they will beat you with things you haven't seen yet. You need to just forget about them and dictate on your own what you want to do. Don't make it about film study. Make it about you. Make it about yourself. Be like me. Be a narcissist. If that's what I want for Joe Brady, is I want narcissism next year. I want Joe Brady to go into most games with the mindset that I do what I want. I'm going to get my offense to do what it wants to do in this game. And I don't care where the matchup is. I don't care what the analytics say. If I want to run the ball this week because the weather's going to be cold, I'm going to run the hell out of the ball. And you're not going to stop me, even if you are a great defense. Now, do that every week. And then that's how you're going to get by the Kansas City Chiefs, at least as an offensive coordinator. On the defensive side of the ball, Bobby Babich. How can you be mad about the job that first-time defensive coordinator Bobby Babich did this year? How many games did your defense... It wasn't perfect, right? Your defense was not perfect. You didn't do well. We talked about it earlier. All of your team's warts defensively showed up in one game. because you played the best quarterback and offensive coordinator combination in the entire league, and they exposed every flaw in your defense. And there's nothing you can do about that, especially not as a first-time coordinator who the last time around you thought you had the answers, and they know you think that. They know that you think you've studied them. And so all of a sudden they're, to the player's admission, pulling out plays out of formations that you've seen them run dozens of times but had no idea that they had in their playbook. That's what it is to go up against the best, right? And so Bobby Babich, I'm not mad at you. Nobody should be. I would say both of these coordinators grew, and they grew exponentially over the course of what this 2024 season was. If there's a lesson for Bobby Babich to take away from this season, the way it ended,
less gold chains?
No. I think he needs to have a legitimate conversation with Sean McDermott sometimes about control. How many Bobby Babich is known for his aggressive defensive style. And then there's a lot of games where you watched Bobby Babich all of a sudden seemingly take a back seat, and you saw a very familiar looking conservative approach step to the forefront. As a first timer on the job, I completely understand the dynamic of wanting to defer back to what's always worked. But the reality is there's a reason you're at this level, kid. It's because you do so well at your job with the aggressive scheme you have. You might as well keep it because, Chris, do the Chiefs ever lay off? Do the Chiefs ever stop pursuing? Do they ever stop the aggressive blitzing? Do they ever stop the just basically pursuit style football rather than, hey, we're going to lay back and let you come to us because we have a lead?
No, we like to do that.
The Chiefs press and they press and they press and they press you until you break. My hope for Bobby Babich is that having to have watched from the opposing sideline, now 2 games in a row, Steve Spagnuolo operate, and seeing what it is to see regular season Steve Spagnuolo versus playoff Steve Spagnuolo, and saying, hey, this is what makes the best, is because they never shy away. They don't take their foot off the gas. This is what's working. We're going to keep doing it. And in order to do that, he's got to get the confidence to basically tell Sean McDermott, listen, I know you're the head coach, but also I'm your coordinator. I'm trying to make a name for myself here. I'm trying to get myself a head coaching job someday. I want to be you. You need to do what Ron Rivera did for you, Sean, and let me be me. I think that that's what Bobby Babich has to do. And he has to learn from all of this season and take with him into 2024 or 2025. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Terry Pegula. Terry Pegula doesn't have a massive role in this, but he does to a certain degree. Before we really get into the nuts and bolts and the meat and potatoes of tonight's show, Terry Pegula has to take away from this season that I think because of the guarantees of non-interference that have been worked into his contract extensions for Bean and McDermott. For those of you who don't know, there are some pretty ironclad things worked into both of their contract extensions that have been since their initial contract extensions back in 2019, 2020. There are very few arenas within the Buffalo Bills organization and operation that Terry Pegula is actually allowed to meddle in. Contractually, he's not allowed to have say over certain things.
Just the Sabres.
Some of that has to do with the mess that you see going on within Pegula Sports Entertainment and within the Sabres. But with that, I look at Terry Pegula and I say, look, you got to build some accountability, man. And here's what I hate about this week. Everybody hears the word accountability and they think it means firing someone. You know, we all work professionally, most of us anyway. And when people hear the word accountability, they assume that means you write people up when they break the rules and you fire them if they're wrong. I've managed people. And for those of you who have ever had to manage other human beings, accountability is so much more than just firing everyone who makes a mistake. It is demanding better. It is laying out like, hey, okay, we didn't get to where we wanted to this year. Let's make a list of objectives for this season that we want to make or this year at work. Then at the end of the year, if you fall short of those objectives, let's talk about why. And let's talk about the skill sets you need to develop in order to continue growing so that you can get there. And if you're not doing that as a manager or as an owner or as somebody who runs one of these organizations, then you are failing the people who work for you because you're not pushing them to be great. You look at a Terry Pegula who is allowing this disaster that's unfolding with the Buffalo Sabres right now. This is a guy who's not comfortable getting in the arena and having those hard conversations. It's clear. Otherwise, Chris, he would have blown that Sabres mess up months ago.
I mean, he should have.
Terry Pegula has to take away from this season that this team is on the right track. But also, it wouldn't hurt to light a fire under some people. And that doesn't mean that you have to threaten to fire anyone. What it means is having an honest conversation about where do you want to be? You want to be a Super Bowl champion. Okay, come tell me what you're doing to improve from last year to get there. And then you write it down and you record it, and then you come back next year and go, did you accomplish those things? And if not, what were your roadblocks? Let's work on them together. There needs to be somebody in the building, Chris, almost like if Terry Pegula is not comfortable doing it, then a president of operations, a guy like a Tom Coughlin, who could come in and be like, guys, I've held a Lombardi. I've won 2 of them as a coach. What are you doing to get there? And let's talk about it. Let's talk about the process. You know, Sean McDermott talks about being a process-oriented guy. Let's talk about your process and what are we doing to get over the hump? And I think that if Terry Pegula can do that, instead of allowing this to continue in its current fashion, you will see more improvement year over year. You really will. And Chris, what do you think about that dynamic?
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to it. I mean, because the Sabres need a director of hockey ops. I wouldn't be. I'd love to see the numbers on that across the NFL. How many NFL teams have that in their front office structure, having a player personnel guy? I don't know who you would get to take that role for Buffalo.
No idea.
I mean, I don't know. I think Marv Levy retired.
You don't bring Marv Levy back in here. I watched, this isn't me making fun of Marv Levy, but I was at an autograph signing once with the Hashtag Sports and the Rock Sports Network guys, and I watched Marv Levy get lost trying to find an exit door. And he just wandered for a minute, and it was one of the most jarring experiences because I go, oh no, he's old. Oh no. Either way, I think if you can get there, that's what you need to do if you're Terry Pegula. And the reason you need to get there is because you have Sean McDermott, who has polarized the entire fan base, the football world this week. I've seen some wild shit talked about this week. Now, this is where the podcast gets fired up, and I'm going to refill my whiskey. I love Jeremy Rogers. It took 30 minutes of listening to Drew to already be ready for week 1 in September. You're fucking right, boys, because it's about the catharsis. This is entertainment, right? Like, this is entertainment. It's escapism about escapism. If you're not having fun with it and you're not willing to open up to it, then what are we doing here? Loosen up, lighten up, Francis. Now, when it comes to Sean McDermott.
They want Tom Donahoe in the comments.
Tom Donahoe! Here's what I have for you. I understand that some really big platforms and some really crazy people have said some wild shit this week about our head coach. And about, I feel like I'm Aragorn, to nerd out here for a second, I'm Aragorn giving the Black Gate speech. It's like, I see in your eyes the same hatred of our head coach that at one point in time probably would have taken me. And it would have swallowed me whole, and I would have come down here and drank a bottle of liquor and screamed about it at the top of my lungs. But not this day. No. On this day, I'm watching. And I'm watching you all, and I'm watching the literal media go out. Like, Warren Sharp is a very smart individual, Chris. His analytics are spot on. He's growing in terms of a voice and how he speaks about the sport, and his social media game's really good. To watch him come out and pound the table for the Bills to fire Sean McDermott and hire Steve Spagnuolo, the owner of one of the most disastrous head coaching stints, right up there with Nate Hackett. Just, it's so long ago, nobody remembers it. Why do you think the guy hasn't gotten another job offer? Bobby Babich has gotten calls about being a head coach before Steve Spagnuolo. I want you to let that one marinate. So when some smart guy on the internet goes, oh, it's just easy, you just plug and play. Okay. So there's some things I want to say here. First of all, this idea that Sean McDermott didn't have him ready to go is frustrating, right? And I get that. As a team, you look at the players and you go, how come their players just look more energetic than ours? How can they? No. What this is that's when you have to think versus when you can just go out and dictate a football game. And that's why it felt so suffocating. Everyone in the chat, everyone watching us live can admit to a man, there was at no point in that game, even when we had the lead, when you felt good about where we stood. And that's because one team was just playing ball and one team almost felt like it was thinking too much about what it was trying to accomplish. They belabored the point and it felt like it. Okay? You can park some of that at Sean McDermott's doorstep. I know when I was hammered, I did the same thing Sunday night. I've had a couple days to sober up, unplug from football, think about it all. And I've come back with the assessment that there are some people with some really shitty opinions out there. Now, Chris, I don't hate this guy the way some people do, Chris Hulbert. Some people really dislike this guy's opinions. I want you to show the audience the tweet that he put out. This is what really got me fired up about Sean McDermott today. This idea that like, oh, a coach who has to learn, right? Oh, we hired a coach who has to learn, and I wish we didn't have to do that. You know, too bad we didn't need to learn so many things. It would take a decade to make the Super Bowl. Buddy, you don't know me, and you sure as hell don't know history. Allow me to give you a lesson, okay? Let's walk through this hand in hand. Do you know, Chris, that only 3 coaches since the AFL and NFL merger have gone 7 straight seasons without a playoff win? There's 3. Marvin Lewis in Cincy, Jim Mora in New Orleans, and Tomlin in Pittsburgh. McDermott is the polar opposite of them in that he's won a playoff game every single season since 2020 and has made the dance 7 out of his 8 seasons. It is true. Sean McDermott is the longest tenured NFL head coach without a Super Bowl appearance. I can't defend that. Other than those playoff successes, 2 conference title games, 4 straight divisional round appearances, it's sure as hell not for lack of trying. It's not because he's a bad coach. When people say, oh, Sean McDermott needs to move on from, myself included, you sometimes have to take a step back, sober up, and take a look at it and say, Spin, you don't have to actually be sober to sober up. That's a fair assessment, sir. I'll drink to that. For the people saying it shouldn't take Sean McDermott this long to get to a Super Bowl. First of all, Andy Reid. Andy Reid, anybody? But no. That's low-hanging fruit. That's too easy. Let me hit you with some other names. How about this? Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor made one quickly. Where's he been since? Where is Zach Taylor? But Zach Taylor is closer to getting fired since his Super Bowl appearance than he is to making it back. How about Ken Wisenhunt? Ken Wisenhunt made the Super Bowl in his 2nd season in the NFL. One of the most entertaining Super Bowls I've ever seen in my life. Finished his career with 5 straight playoff-less seasons. John Harbaugh took over the Ravens. Who was it? Brian Billick was the coach. Beats his brother and gets his first ring in 2012. Hasn't been back to a Super Bowl since 2012. John Harbaugh, his fan base isn't screaming for his head. Hasn't been back to the Super Bowl since 2012. He's 1-3 in AFC title game appearances. And with the blow up that's about to happen for their franchise, he might not get back there anytime soon. Tony Dungy. Actually, I want to start with this because it's John Gruden. John Gruden's this offensive mind that people talk about. He had a 4-year run in Oakland. 2 wildcard losses. Goes to Tampa, gets Tampa over the hump in his first season because he inherits Tony Dungy's team and his roster. Do you know that he goes and wins that Super Bowl, coaches for another 10 years, and out of those 10 years only made the playoffs twice and never made it out of the wild card round? Tony Dungy gets fired after the first 6 years in Tampa that saw him made the NFC title game and the divisional round. 4 playoff appearances in 6 years. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they fire Tony Dungy and they bring in John Gruden and fuck it, they got the win. They got the trophy. They got to hold it. Tony Dungy didn't appear in his first Super Bowl until his 10th season in 2006, and he won it. Chris, it's not uncommon for a coach to take a while to get there. But you know what's worse is if you get there and then you never make it back. If I have to play the long game on this with a quarterback like Josh Allen, I'm willing to see that through. I think at a certain point we have to be. If it ever got to where Josh Allen was getting long in the tooth, like I've reached a place with this. I've come full circle on the fire Sean McDermott train. But a lot of that is because in 2024, what I saw from him, like I'm just as angry as everybody else about the way the year ended. And it is true that a fish rots from the head down. Once again, if you look unprepared compared to your opponents, that is a coaching problem. But that doesn't mean that you're somehow fireable. It just means that next to the gold standard that is the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL, you are a little bit paled in comparison, and you can lose by a field goal in that game. His old mentor, right, who staffed him, who knows everything about him, just did a better job in terms of prep, film study, and attitude adjustment than McDermott did. That's it. And it showed up in so many moments of the game. So many of the comments that got made afterwards. Greg Rousseau, admitting, hey, I crashed inside on Mahomes' touchdown because I had no idea they would ever pull and run out of that formation. Okay. Their well is just deeper than ours in terms of some facets of the game. Okay. Their roster supports that kind of thing. And that's okay. Right? That's okay because this is a team that was built to go chase a third Super Bowl ring. And ours was a team that was literally cut down for cap considerations to keep our window open so that they could try to get one more time to get over the hump on these guys. There's a glass ceiling, it feels like, between us and the Chiefs organization. I won't deny that. But how it feels, right, doesn't mean that it's impossible. For an organization that I and people close to me have deemed in the past a highly unserious organization, you can't tell me that Sean McDermott did not grow in 2024 in ways that were really encouraging for everybody. And it feels crazy to me that I have to be out here having this conversation this week. I'm looking at the comments right now. We have proven it's now impossible to beat the Chiefs 2 times in a season. Boom. I talked about it earlier tonight. I think one of the biggest detriments to the Bills is that we have to play them every year because we show them what we are generally because the game always means more to Buffalo in the regular season than it does to the Chiefs. So when they lose that game, they don't care. And then they come out in the playoffs every time we see them with a whole gamut of things that nobody's prepared for because they have a whole subset of their playbook because they've been doing this together for so long that nobody this season has seen on tape. And they Rochambeau you with it, and you're shocked, and you go, man, I wish I could have seen that coming. Well, it's because you already tipped your hand once this year, and that's hard to overcome twice in a season. That's why, Chris, what we've done in the AFC East is so impressive. But I love how you can crow about how great Sean McDermott is for winning the division 5 times in a row, and then take a look and go, oh, he needs to be fired because he can't beat this one guy. I love this. You look at the way that Sean McDermott grew this year. He lost the gun shy label. No one would ever look at the Buffalo Bills this season and go, it's that damn conservative Sean McDermott holding him back. Chris, when did you see a punt from our opponent's 40 this year?
I don't know.
Not that you can remember because it didn't happen that often, if at all. He answered so many questions about the discord and disconnect between him and his quarterback. You know, that hilarious tweet from Mike Schopp where he's like, oh, they can't even look at each other. And then they're doing snow angels together on the field. Like, he answered the bell. He had maybe his best, this is the most important. He showed the best chemistry between head coach and coordinators that Sean McDermott has illustrated in his entire professional career. When he got here in 2017, him and Leslie Frazier were on the same page. Frazier was teaching him the ropes of how to be a coach. And he had Rick Dennison. And he fired Rick Dennison into the sun the first opportunity he got. He brings in Brian Daboll. By year 2, he's micromanaging Brian Daboll. And it causes friction. And Brian Daboll leaves. Then he starts to lean on Leslie Frazier, and Leslie Frazier leaves the organization. And for 1 year, Sean McDermott's just his own DC. Why? Because he couldn't find anyone to take the job. Sean McDermott has been a control freak in the past. And yet, in a year where you think he would be the worst version of himself because he has rookies, he took his hands off the wheel in a lot of areas of these games and just let them be them. Let them make decisions. Let them learn how to be coordinators. And the result was an AFC title game appearance on a team that was built to fail, on a team that was supposed to be a retooling project. I think Sean McDermott has learned a lot about the value of trusting your coordinators. And he said as much in his article with Tyler Dunn about how, and like, it'd be interesting to get Ty in studio and have the conversation with him about how it's weird to say it, but maybe your quote-unquote hatchet job about Sean McDermott actually might have revitalized his career because it forced him, he admitted as much, to hold a mirror up to himself and say, who am I? Am I the coach that I think I am? Is this actually how other people perceive me? And if so, what do I have to do to get better? And you saw that evolve, and you heard it in his article where he got to sit down and do an interview this year with Sean McDermott at the end of the season about the playoffs and how he's grown and all of these things. So we all know that, you know, almosts and, you know, doing your best. Like, we all know what Sean Connery thinks about people whining about their best. Sean McDermott also isn't going anywhere. As angry as you might get, he's not leaving. Which at times, when you're mad at him, can make you feel like Jim Carrey picking up your car from the impound lot in Liar Liar. You scratched my car. No, I didn't. Where? Right there. Yeah, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. I'm going to do nothing. So what I want you guys to do is hold up whatever you're drinking, swish it around, take a long pull of whatever you got in your hand, and let's take a look at some of the things, right, that Sean McDermott's going to have to learn in 2025 if there's any hope that there's going to be prom queens in all of our collective futures. Chris, that line from The Rock, you have no idea what I'm talking about, do you?
The Rock, like Dwayne Johnson?
Of course. I rest my case. First of all, does Matt Smiley need to be fired?
Yes.
Here's a question. Does your special teams coach need to be replaced? 15th in the NFL in yards point per game. Your kicker just struggled all year long. 28th kick return coverage yards allowed. 23rd in punt coverage. So your coverage units were terrible. You were one of the worst DVOA rated units in the entire NFL. Your kick return game was good because of Brandon Codrington. And then he got hurt and disappeared for the last month of football. You were 5th in the NFL in 20-plus yard punt returns and 7th in average kick return yards. So you've got a really good kick return game and your coverage units are terrible. Chris, would you allow that? I'd settle for a mediocre return game if you can just make sure that, I don't know, block in the back, right? In that game, there was an egregious uncalled block in the back by Kansas City when they took that return out past the 50.
Yeah.
But either way, you can't have that. I can't have guys who can't maintain gap integrity, especially for a team that intentionally puts so many assets into their special teams unit. So I guess the question is, like, is this enough to fire this guy? Hey? I don't know. I think you have to start thinking about it. I hope he's seen this and he's decided I'm not going to let this thing that I just keep ham-fisting players into. I need special teams aces. I need Saron Neal to not play defense and just play special teams. I need Reggie Gilliam to just only be around on offense to grab Josh's butt cheeks and push him. Otherwise, he's my special teams ace. Ace in what? You suck in coverage. I also think that he needs, and I think that this plays into it, he needs to not just be better, but he needs to be more objective when it comes to player evaluation. Let's talk about Kyer fucking Elam. Can we have the Kyer Elam conversation, everybody? The 70th rated cornerback in the entire NFL, if you organize it for qualifying snaps. This guy was hot garbage. He has regressed literally every single year that he's been in the NFL. Everyone said, oh, he's not supposed to be a man corner. Kyer Elam's supposed to be a zone corner. He's better in man coverage. Do you know that he was the 113th ranked man coverage corner? 70% completion percentage allowed and 7th highest QBR when targeted in the entire NFL in man coverage. That's what you're supposed to bring to the table, kid. I think about him the same way I think about Lewis Seen. The Bills picked up and added to their practice squad a former first-round safety who was drafted in the first round by the Vikings and then cut, and we brought him in because he had elite traits. DBs, and we've had this conversation with Bruce Nolan, during the draft series. DBs drafted at the end of the first round, it's a historical wasteland of picks if you draft a DB between 20 and 32. The reason being is that because you're trying to land guys who still have elite physical traits. You want the guy who ran the 4.40. You want the guy, but they don't have good tape. You just think you can fix them. You're like, well, it's the Tremaine Edmonds effect. Give me a giant block of clay and I can mold it into a great football player. It is clear that this franchise is not up to the task of getting NFL production out of Kyer Elam. And if nothing else that happened this season put the exclamation point on that, it was this Kansas City Chiefs game. He looked lost. He looked like he did not belong on an NFL field. It's embarrassing. If they had a minor league to send him to, I don't know that they would take him. The joke I made in the middle of the game in my living room, I go, when they said off coverage, Kyer, they didn't mean take the play off. They just meant stand 5 yards downfield, you idiot. Sunk cost cannot keep this franchise from repeating the mistakes that they made this year by making Elam their most qualified backup. So when they look at that and they do their player evaluation, they have to understand he's a guy who's highly flawed and he's not cut out for this. Hopefully, this has taught them a lesson. Just like A.J. Epinesa. Here's a guy you drafted who is a middling NFL talent. He's not a bum. He's not a bust. He's just not very good. But you decided to give him a bridge deal because you didn't know what else to do. And he was a guy who was familiar with your scheme. And in your mind as a coach, you say, well, scheme familiarity should help. It should make A.J. Epinesa more useful. And we're still kind of holding out hope that he'll turn that corner and become the pass rusher we always thought he could be. He finished 115th in pass rush productivity. That's hits, sacks, pressures per rush attempt. He's a streaky, inconsistent player whose ceiling for impact plays is incredibly low, as evidenced by the fact that of players to play at least 50% of the average defensive snaps on the year, he ranks 60th out of 67 qualifying players. He's just he's just a dude. He's a jag. Right? He's a jag the same way that this defensive line is built out of jags. And the crazy thing is that those two players that I just mentioned are going to account for $11 million of our cap space in 2025. This is where you have to grow up, Sean. You have to take a look because, Chris, we've talked about this. The dynamic between GM and coach. I'm coach, you're GM. I make the grocery list and I tell you what I need in order to make gumbo. Your job is to go to the grocery store and get me close enough that I can at least make a stew that I can throw on the table that might make everybody full, right? Elam is the Darius Hayward Bay of corners. That's the best comp. There it is. Hashtag sports. Elam is the Darius Hayward Bay of corners.
Clearly Mario.
I love this. I don't blame Elam because he shouldn't have been out there. He should be parking cars at the parking spot across the street from the airport here in Buffalo.
Hey, do you want to cover somebody that should be fired? I mean, I don't have your notes, so I don't know.
I know you don't. Who do you want to talk about?
There's one guy that comes to mind that should no longer have a job.
Who's that?
John Perry. If you guys didn't know, we hired away John Perry from the ESPN booth to help out McDermott with challenging calls. I feel like he should be fired into the sun.
See, Chris, this is what I love. You don't talk a ton, but when you do, you do bring gems. That's a great point.
I forgot that we talked about that on Sunday after the game.
I hope that he looks around and goes, John, you didn't really earn your paycheck here last year. What is it you say you do here, John Perry? And he'd go, whoop, I stand here in the booth and I wear this Bills polo and, people have questions for me and I give them answers. I go, yeah, but what do you do? He goes, well, I talk to the coordinator and then I talk to you and I talk to the guys with the cameras and then I talk to you. Yeah, but what do you do, John? I'm a people person, damn it. Why can't I just talk to the guys who have the cameras? You're not giving me anything here. That's a great point.
Jeremy Rogers forgot that we had John Perry.
Exactly. We all forgot he existed. I think that what I just want to see from him in terms of, just to close up my point about player assessment, I want to see, because sometimes his instincts on guys to grow in this system have paid off. Cam Lewis is a really good example. Cam Lewis has grown into a reliable player on this defense who doesn't cost much. Another one might be Taylor Rapp. Dorian Williams seems to be on his way to acclimating to this system. But if you throw in the team's reliance on just subpar athletes at free safety and just a boatload of Jags on the defensive line, just another guys, Lawson, Toohill, Austin Johnson, Quentin Johnson, Jefferson, or Tim Settle. The fact that they brought in all these dudes who didn't move the needle whatsoever, it plays a direct hand in our team's struggles. And that's an area that he has to learn from. He's got to stop going in there, and when he's talking to his position coaches, he needs to start to teach them. And maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe some of the position coaches need to be changed out. Yeah, I need this team to get to a place where there are a more objective criticizer of the talent on the team. Spin, the Bishop interception was a good challenge because it should have been overturned. 100%. That's a good call, Chris. But then to not have one there on the spot of the ball on the first Kincaid play, that's one I get angry about.
So that play that we're discussing, I thought it was going to be a catch through and through because they changed it. The ball didn't move enough to warrant it being incomplete. Yes, it hit the ground, but there was still control. Control is a tie. That's a tie. Tie goes to the receiver. I felt like that was a catch. If Cole Bishop wanted to do anything, he should just treat it like a Hail Mary, knock it down.
That's fair.
Then it would have been third down and whatever from wherever, back at the 40 or whatever.
And I think probably the juiciest piece of what I can give to you here tonight, in what is going to be one of the longer podcasts we record this season, but fuck it, you guys love me. That's why you're still sitting here. There needs to be a major philosophy shift in how Sean McDermott plays defense. The question is, can you win a Super Bowl while being cheap and having average talent on the defensive line? And I struggle with this, and I'm hoping that Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane have a really hard conversation about it, right? It's going to be difficult to parse through this, but nickel defense is the identity of the Sean McDermott defense. It has been since he arrived here in Buffalo. And as Taron Johnson gets another year older and a little bit more injury prone, I mean, they're stacking up. And there is a part of me that worries about the Poyer cliff, right? Like when you're a player who's smaller and plays a very physical game, the aging process accelerates. And so what happens for a guy like Taron Johnson? Like, where is the cliff? Because I can tell you they didn't see it coming when Poyer hit it. They didn't see it coming. They got rid of him a year too late, right?
Yeah.
Letting him come back last year was a problem. And they saw that. He was just old and slow. Teron Johnson has suffered multiple injuries this season, and part of it's just being older. Shoulder subluxations, his shoulders literally popping out of the socket. This is what a lifetime of being a small guy taking on giant running backs and giant blockers does for your body. It's not that he's a bad football player. It's physics and age, which are unstoppable. I look at that and I think to myself, between Teron Johnson, what will be Terrell Bernard's extension, and Matt Milano, your three most expensive players on your defense could potentially all be weighing in at under 245 pounds. And I think that that's a problem when you look around the league at some of the other successful football teams and how they choose to spend their money and where they allocate resources, right? Because if I go around and I look for NFL comps for where your top 3 or 4 cap hits should be, here's what I see. I look at the Texans. Their left tackle, they've got an edge rusher in Danielle Hunter, and they're paying their right tackle. Those are their top 3 cap hits. And they have a rookie quarterback. So obviously they kind of get a pass on this. Otherwise, he would occupy one of those slots like they do for all the other competitive teams in the AFC. The Chiefs have their quarterback. They have Chris Jones at defensive tackle, right tackle, and Juwan Taylor, which is barf. That's a terrible contract. But they paid a right tackle. They paid a guard in Joe Tooney. Tell me that those aren't 3 perennial Pro Bowl talents.
Yes.
3 out of the 4 are stars. The Ravens are interesting because they have their quarterback, a cornerback in Marlon Humphrey, who even after their loss to the Bills, talked about the fact that he has no guaranteed money left on his contract and he could be gone. An inside linebacker, a tight end, and a D tackle. In our recap show last week, we talked about the concept that the blow up might be coming for the Ravens. They have 17 UFAs and the 24th most cap space in the NFL. They can't bring them all back. And they've lost a lot of beef in the tent. They have no left tackle or right tackle currently under contract as of today with the roster freeze. The Ravens are in trouble because they haven't paid the beef inside their trenches. The best teams in the NFL prioritize pass protection, quarterback, and pass rush. We've got half that equation figured out. We have 2 stud tackles. But when you go to the other side of the ball, we do not have the upper echelon defensive line talent that other teams do. Other perennial contenders have more firepower in the trenches than the Buffalo Bills, whether it be investments of draft capital, whether it be investments of cap space. They have more than we have, right? At a certain point, talent inside of a vacuum, saying, well, I've got the best weak side linebacker in football. I've got a great opportunistic middle linebacker in Terrell Bernard. At a certain point in a football game, that stops mattering and it just becomes physics and helmet on a helmet, imposing your will and size on the other team. And we just got to watch that against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I hope that they were paying attention when they're watching the tape as to how they got bullied so badly. Like, Chris, what would you rather have? Would you rather go into a football game thinking to yourself as an offensive coordinator, I've got a disadvantage against my opponent's linebackers? Or would you rather say oh, I've got oh man, they're defensive ends. I don't know, I've got a disadvantage there and I've got to figure out how to deal with it. What boat would you rather be in?
I have no idea.
You would take the team that has a linebacker advantage over you every day because at least they're not harassing your quarterback. At least they're not able to generate the pass rush. And that's what they're not able to hold serve at the line of scrimmage and set the edge when you try to run the ball. That's what doomed us in this Chiefs game. Our defensive line got blown off the field. Right? I've watched teams that went light on the line and tried to fill in with specialty talent all around the place. The New York Jets did it in 2019. Let's not be the Jets. Let's not do that, right? And then there's also questions about why some of the guys who have trotted out there on the D-line haven't developed. When McDermott got here, This is Greg Presti. Coaching. McChoke's the coach. That's the job. Simple. If the CEO fails at the goal, but you don't keep him, blame the employees. Greg, it's not that simple. Like, here's the thing. You want to talk about blaming the employees? How about this? Do you know that when you look at the Kansas City Chiefs and you see the way they just dominated the Buffalo Bills, do you know that there's a guy who exists? I have him up here. Do you know what his Chris? Do you know a guy who actually has more Super Bowl appearances than Patrick consecutively than Patrick, or at least in his jacket, than Patrick Mahomes?
Mike Lodish.
No. Chief. Is this real? Can you guys hear me?
Mike's on. There we go. Mike. Apparently everything's shut off.
Can you all hear us? Somebody.
Let me.
Is Drew singing? Is that why they cut his mic?
Oh, there. Well, it should be on now. Let me.
Hang on.
We're gonna restore some.
Hang on.
Restore some audio connections.
Is it working?
Yes.
Can you all hear me?
We're back.
Yeah, that's spin.
All right.
Let me get back
back
at my point. Yeah, we literally, the whole thing, everything about our thing just blew up.
Yeah, our video switcher. Our video switcher shut off completely. Like,
it's not a rock ball report without gremlins in the system.
It cut off the live, and then also when you are live using an ATEM, it records a backup. That went too. So, I guess we're back.
We're back. So, like I said, Brendan Daly, the guy's 49 years old. He's the linebackers coach. But in 2019, they drafted linemen, and they got Brendan Daly. Brendan Daly went on to coach some of their best talents that are currently on the line right up until, what did he coach to? Until 2021. And then they went out and got Joe Cullen. Joe Cullen is now their defensive line coach. Do you want to know why? Because Brendan Daly was so good at his job, they said, hey, our linebackers suck and we can't spend money on it. Can you go coach those guys? And he dropped back and became the linebackers coach. This guy, Brendan Daly, right? What is he on? His 11th? Let's see. 11th Super Bowl between the Patriots, between being a Patriots coach and a Chiefs coach. He is now on his 11th Super Bowl. He won 3 Super Bowls with the Patriots. This guy is a monster. And they brought him into their organization. He coached up the D-line so well that they finally said, hey, fuck it, can you go fix our linebacker position? Now, Sean McDermott in his very first season brought in Mike Warfel, one of my favorite defensive line coaches in the NFL at the time because of his Arlie Ermy kind of approach to being an NFL coach. And I don't think he gets enough credit for breaking the drought because that team made the playoffs while relying on guys like Eddie Yarbrough and Adolphus Washington on the 2017 Bills to break the drought. Since then, we've had 3 D-line coaches, and not a single one of them has been able to produce the same kind of results. We're on year 2 of Marcus West. And if you Google his name right now, he shows up in multiple articles referencing the best D-line coaches in the NFL, which feels wrong. Chris, do you think that our D-line has been one of the best in the NFL?
Meh. Do you have AIDS over there?
No, what I have is I have children who go to Petri dishes, referred to as schools and daycares, and they bring home every disease under the sun. So with that in mind, when you take a look at it, we have yet to find, like we just watched the impact that Aaron Kromer had on the offensive line. Where is our Aaron Kromer of the defensive line? Because I can tell you this, I have yet to see any development. And Oliver's still the same inconsistent player that he was, right?
Yeah, he went missing for a couple of games this year.
Greg Rousseau improved, but he's not a world beater. Von Miller is old. He's old Von Miller now. AJ Epinesa is still the same player he has been for the last season and a half. I mean, you've got two choices. You either have to get way better from a coaching perspective, and you got to find a guy who can go out there and really what you have to do is like the Patriots. Do you remember when they had the offensive line whisperer, Danny Scarnecchia?
Yeah, Dante Scarnecchia.
If you can't find that, then you've got to upgrade the talent. You have to overhaul the talent on your defensive line. And some of that might come at a detriment to your ability to continue playing the nickel defense. Some of it might mean you have to trust rookies. You might have to say, hey, look, I can no longer afford a Matt Milano, a Dorian Williams, and a Terrell Bernard, and a Taron Johnson, and these things, and continue to play them in high leverage and high snap situations. I have to change. I have to become more orthodox. I can't be the team that just runs nickel all the time because I trust Taron Johnson so much. Because the end is coming for Taron Johnson. The same way it came for Poyer, the same way it came for Hyde. Is the time to start switching now? And maybe you start moving Taron Johnson into more of a specialist role. The same way you've done with Von Miller now to protect him and keep him fresh into the later portions of the season. Chris, I don't know. Am I crazy?
Yes, you are.
I like how when Chris talks, he never takes the camera.
Sometimes I have to, sometimes I don't.
The answer is never. But it's okay. Your stupid hair enrages our audience the same way it does me.
Do you want me to go to Greg Presti in the comments? Is just
retracted his message?
Well, no, he's raising hell in the comments with his hatred for McDermott.
I mean, you're free to rage, man. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not going to tell you. Listen, I am one of the most volatile people when I watch a football game, to the point that it has strained my relationships with friends and family.
I was hoping you were going to say your wife.
No, she's accepted the mania. Now, what I will say is it is your prerogative to be perennially negative about Sean McDermott. It's like when you have a teenage kid who's pissing you off and he's doing all this shit that you're like, can you just do the things I ask you to do? And they don't. Well, you've only got two options. You can either drop him off at Father Baker's over there at the orphanage, or you can learn to deal. And sir, it sounds like you need to learn how to deal. Greg Preston goes, I love you guys. It's the best, right? Like, this is what we do here. We are the lunatic fringe, but I'm trying to bring you guys under the tent because I'm telling you, I like this. John Gruden and Allen versus McDermott and Allen. Sal. Gruden and Allen equals Reed and Mahomes. Okay. So you think that if you brought in John Gruden right now, he could do it? That's fair. His career says that he can inherit someone's team with all the pieces and maybe get him over the hump for a year, and then it's all going to go to shit. If you are willing to sacrifice another decade of the Bills in order to, I don't know, maybe get that ring, and then what happens if Sal's wrong, guys? This thing of John Gruden could obviously do it, and then it doesn't work. And you do kind of what the Broncos did. You know, I was the guy who started the conversation. If you all forgotten, I called the radio station because I felt bad for Nate Geary. I heard the radio callers after we had lost to Cincinnati 2 years ago last year on Sunday Night Football. And I called the radio station to save him from callers. And I said, Nate, what if he's John Fox? What if he's the defensive-minded head coach who needs to be moved on from so that an offensive-minded head coach can come in here and win a title? And the problem is, if you do that, your margins are still that slim, but your future gets dimmer year over year, especially when you watch a coach like McDermott show you that he's... when you're defending John Gruden's quarterbacks...
Brad Johnson.
How dare you slander Jeff Garcia like that? I'll have you. I'll have you know Jeff Garcia is an upstanding quarterback. God, I love that we're having a Jeff Garcia conversation in the middle of a Bills podcast.
That's what we're here for.
So with that said, right, it's not a great proposition, but there are ways for Sean McDermott to decide what to do with this scheme. But I also think the GM has to get involved. Chris, take the camera for 30 seconds. What do you think about Brandon Beane?
Brandon Beane, I would say he's better off at drafting your mid to late round picks than he is on early picks. He's gonna have to change that this year.
Yeah,
we're gonna need you to hit on a first and a second.
I have some thoughts about that. Now, first of all, for Sean McDermott, it's not a great proposition. Like, hey, change your entire scheme. But it might be the thing that saves enough about what makes your defense special that you can roll the nickel out and have it be highly effective, but also be blessed with 3 linebackers who can all do their jobs. You just might have to reallocate some of your assets. And that's what makes this interesting when it comes to Brandon Beane, because his profile as a GM, contract savvy guy, who just by virtue of being in lockstep with his head coach typically finds really good value on players like Mac Hollins. And it just has a scouting department that does really well in the deeper parts of the draft. His misses at the top, to your point, are kind of the only black spot you can put on him. Otherwise, he's not only a GM that people love, players and agents will openly talk about how much they love Brandon Beane. But he also has to learn something from having watched the way this game went on. It's funny that this guy's talking about John Gruden. John Gruden this week, he uses a phrase on his podcast when he's talking about players like trench players. He calls them the green team. He goes, the pass rushers, because those are the guys who make the money, because those are the guys who get the job done. The green team for Kansas City was the reason that he thought that they would win that game. And Chris, was he right or was he wrong? They controlled the line of scrimmage in every phase of the game.
Yes.
The green team for Kansas City won them a trip to another third consecutive Super Bowl. You take a look at what happened in the previous week's game. Houston got screwed on penalties against the Chiefs. And their offense was terribly inefficient. But it didn't matter. The game stayed close because they had house wreckers at defensive end. And their defensive line as a whole was able to harass Mahomes, stop the run, and basically make life really hard on that offense. The Texans GM understood Nick Caserio understood the value of the green team. And he made a big move. He goes up, he gets CJ Stroud. And then he says, no, I'm not done. I need a Will Anderson. Defensive rookie of the year. Then the following year says, hey, guess what? I'm not done. I need a Danielle Hunter. Why? Because I need all the juice that I can get on my defensive line. Poona Ford turns out to be house money for them. Like found money laying on the sidewalk. They pick him up. He becomes an integral part of their pass rush and just what was a pretty good defensive line in that game against Kansas City. Meanwhile, for Beane, you just watched, once again, a must-win game where your defensive ends and your highly paid interior defensive line pass rush barely had a pulse. You watched it happen. And while they're all explainable, right? Because Rousseau was never going to be a twitchy pass rusher. Von Miller's aged out and injury robbed him of the best of himself. Oliver, it's just career inconsistency and double teams. The impact on the game of not having a stout defensive line and one that clearly got outplayed by the opponents, clear as day. The makeup of the room is also suffering the echoes of bad historical decision-making. Chris, I'm going to walk you through the ugly history of what the Bills have done recently to try to make a defensive line. We used a second-round pick on Boogie Basham, who is not rosterable by most NFL teams.
Creed Humphrey.
We could have had Creed Humphrey, but we took Boogie Basham in the second round, and that was a mistake. 2019, Ed Oliver wasn't a reach. but he hasn't developed into a consistent performer. 2020, second rounder A.J. Epinesa, not a starting defensive end in the NFL.
J.K. Dobbins.
Could have had J.K. Dobbins. I love that Chris remembers all the players I would have taken instead. But there are guys that back up on most NFL contenders that I would take over A.J. Epinesa, and that's the damning thing. There are guys like Omenahue for Kansas City who I would take over A.J. Epinesa, and he's a backup. A lot of teams have backup defensive ends who I would take over A.J. Epinesa. And then you doubled down by paying him. You gave him a contract extension and got more of the same experience. You gambled on how many one-tech defensive tackles, Star Lotulelei, when you first got here. And then you said, oh, DaQuan Jones, it's finally happening. And you paid him. And then he immediately turned into a pumpkin, like Cinderella with the clock striking midnight. You went big game hunting. You finally decided to swing for the fences and went and got Von Miller. And what happens, not your fault as a GM, right? He gets injured and then becomes a shell of himself. And it turns out that at that age, with that injury, he can never get back to what Von Miller was as a sack artist. All the random Jags that you've allowed to take part in this Bills roster because they're value finds, that every single time you go up against a team like the Chiefs, they show you what you get for shopping at Aldi's instead of going down to Wegmans, where you should be shopping. Just like McDermott, being in his pro scouts and his college scouts need to learn from those mistakes ASAP. You need to draft a one tech, and a good one. You need to spend, but then again, Chris, didn't they? Like the Carolina Panthers. Remember, Chris, when they signed that other defensive tackle? Oh my God, what was his name? Guys, in the chat. What was the Carolina guy, the project player that Brandon Beane was a part of drafting in Carolina, that not just Star Lotulelei, they also brought this other kid over who played for like some Louisiana team that was also a D tackle who did nothing here for Buffalo. No, it's not Brooks. Oh, I can't think.
Somebody will say it in the comments.
You got to draft a one tech. You can't keep paying them in free agency because it's not working. They're all old. They've all aged out because you can't pay free agent D tackle one money. Solomon flashed in 2024 when he got snaps. Even if his ceiling is just what A.J. Epinesa is right now, I would rather have that than have A.J. Epinesa here. I would take that on, and I think that they should be restocking the cupboard every draft rather than ever again paying a bridge contract to a player like A.J. Epinesa, who has proven that in big games he disappears. Chris, he disappears like one-ply toilet paper. You go, shit.
It's a good reference.
Shit. Literally. That's what happens when you trust A.J. Epinesa in big games. He's going to have to get better at assessing pass rush talent and what we have on the roster. And then it opens up another question about Les Snead time. And this is one thing I love about the draft and what I love about this, because the Bills, like you think about what the
Mario Addison.
No, not Mario Addison. There was another guy. Oh my God.
Continue on your soapbox. I'll Google it.
So, what I love about this dynamic, where the Bills are right now and where they could potentially go, is that, people are saying, it almost sounds like a Trumpism. People are saying, no. But what I'm trying to say is that the average human being walking around in Bills Mafia right now is yelling and they're mad because it feels like you've wasted another year of Josh Allen's prime. And that's correct. But what I will say is that you take a look at it, Matt Stafford did how many years in Detroit? Almost like prison. Like he did how many years in Detroit?
A lot.
And then got traded to LA and won a Super Bowl. And he was 34 years old. So there is still a lot of tread left on the tire when you're a passer like Josh Allen, when you have the physical traits that Josh Allen has. The problem with where they are is that they will perpetually be a bottom 10 drafting team every year for as long as Josh Allen's our quarterback.
Vernon Butler?
Sal, Bills doing Allen like the Packers did Rodgers. Yeah, 100%. But also part of the problem, Vernon Butler, there it is.
Did you not just hear me? I just said that.
Yeah, I know. I just like it when the fans say it, not you.
Well, yeah, that's why I saw it. I read the comment, Vernon Butler.
Guys, thanks for educating my host.
You're the host. I'm the producer.
Producer, host, it's all the same.
No, it's not.
Whiskey. So, whiskey. So here's my idea. You are going to be drafting in the bottom 10 perpetually, as long as you have Josh Allen. This isn't going to get better. But at the same time, even as he ages, he's still going to be eligible to win a Super Bowl. The numbers and data support the idea that it's going to be really, really hard to find the defensive linemen that we're talking about here in this conversation. If you're ever going to try to match up with the Chiefs, if you're ever going to try to get over the hump on these guys, make your life easier as an offense. Defensive player, F.A. Obata. Guys, that makes it Kelvin Benjamin. How about this? How many obscure defensive linemen under Sean McDermott can you name in the chat? Go. Now, the one who brings me the funniest, and F.A. Obata right now might be the highlight.
Daryl Johnson.
How many, the funniest one, I'll send you a bottle of Q42 barbecue rub.
That specific one that's expired.
No. I'll send you a fresh bottle because I'm not a rube. I want the most obscure defensive lineman names, and I'm going to pick the funniest one. So here's what I love. The numbers support the idea that it's going to be hard to find impact wide receivers and impact defensive ends as long as we are drafting in the bottom 10 of the draft round. A guy named Bob Morris, who does football analysis, wrote this ahead of last year's draft. For pass rusher, when he did his analysis, he said among edge rushers and interior defenders who excel at rushing the passer, there's 35 who would be considered at some point to have been quality starters. Of those 35, 26 got taken in the first round. Of those 35, 5 were taken in the third round, but just 2 were taken on day 3, Max Crosby and Matt Judon. There's only a handful of guys who, if you wait, you're going to find quality NFL talent. And I think Mario Granado, who was just in the chat, he might still be here, him and Paul Wineski over at Hashtag Sports actually did a deep dive on the numbers of how many sacks get generated based on where you got drafted generationally. And what they found is that the drop-off after guys drafted in the top 12 is precipitous to the back 12. And then it's even worse if you go into the next round. And then you look at contract extensions. Guys drafted in the top 12 of the draft as pass rushers tend to get contract extensions. The ones who don't, it's a mixed bag. Pass rusher is so hard. It's so hard. And it's why they make so much money, because they're so hard to replace if you do it well. Right? The Myles Garretts and the Max Crosbys of the world. In that way, the Buffalo Bills are going to have to take a look at this. Wide receivers the same way. 27 players who had an AV of at least 50 who were recent picks considered quality starters. 11 taken in the first round, 12 taken on day 2, 4 taken on day 3. They said, listen, everyone thinks wide receiver is the position to draft because, it's the modern NFL and you got to be able to score points. But it is still possible to find a quality starter on day 2. It's still possible to find quality starters on day 3. And so in that way, pass rush reigns supreme. And then they talk about the fact that wide receiver, more than most positions, gets hit by players who might have had some problems, right? Because there's a diva wide receiver thing. Some of these guys might have been labeled a problem somewhere, like Tyreek Hill, he points out in his article. Had Hill not been convicted of domestic violence while in college, he likely would have been drafted in the first round. But he fell to where he fell. He got drafted by Kansas City, and the rest is history. The problem, I don't think, is that Bean can't draft. I think the fact that he's found players like Shakir, Taron Johnson, Matt Milano, Gabe Davis, James Cook, these are all not first-day picks. Shows that on day 2, day 3, day 4, he's pretty good at identifying talent, and his scouting department does a hell of a job. The problem becomes having to constantly hope and pray that some talent falls to you in the first and second round. and that the guys on the field can develop them. There's no blue chip prospects ever coming to you in the NFL draft. If you are a Buffalo Bills team coached by Sean McDermott, quarterback by Josh Allen. Given where we are, and the fact that as we will dig into over the course of the offseason and the pre-draft series, that there's mechanisms available for the Bills to free up significant cap space in the next 2 years while retaining their own homegrown impact talent like Bernard, Shakir, and also take some real swings at acquiring upper echelon talent. It's huge for Brandon Beane. He's got a massive opportunity this offseason in front of him. And so now what you have to do is you have to embrace your inner Les Snead. And you got to be able to say, look, I would love to sit here and go through more of this draft and develop. But we've been doing that. We've done that for 2 cycles of Josh Allen's contract career. We can't afford to keep doing it. At a certain point, you got to go all in and try to win one the same way Les Snead did out there with Matt Stafford at 33 years old or 34 years old with the Rams. This is a point where you're never going to draft a high-end pass rusher where you are in the draft. You're going to end up with more Greg Rousseaus. And Greg Rousseau is a great player. He's just not the guy. He's not the guy who's going to get you over the hump. So why keep trying to do this and watching it blow up in your face in the biggest games of your season when you could go out there and there are bodies to be had? I mean, Chris, I know the popular names, right? Myles Garrett, Max Crosby. How about this? How about a Trey Hendrickson? I mean, do you want to hear this? This is literally from Duke Tobin, the GM of the Cincinnati Bengals today. He goes, Trey Hendrickson's earned a new deal, but it's to be determined if we agree on one. And he went, Chris, how cocky are you as the Bengals GM to say, whether we agree on what that looks like is to be determined. We'll do what we can. We'll do what we feel is right, and we'll try to get Trey re-signed. It's not giving anybody an extension. It's agreeing to an extension. Who the fuck do you think you are, Duke Tobin? You're the GM of the Cincinnati Bengals, a notorious cheapskate franchise that has played contract games with its biggest stars the last 3 seasons. You should have locked up Jamar Chase last year, and you chose not to. Now you have a boatload of problems and no time to solve them. You're going to have to sign T. Higgins, and you're probably going to have to sign, because you saw Iosi Voss and these other fucking guys that you drafted to replace Jermaine Burton, former Alabama player. Dude was at a casino gambling instead of being with his football team on set. You have done a shit job of providing a backstop for your star quarterback. You're going to pay T. Higgins, and you're going to pay Jamar Chase, and that's why you're playing coy with a pass rusher who is clearly elite, like Trey Hendrickson. And that's why I think he's easily had. And then once you trade for him and you clear up the $18 million in cap space you're going to get for him, what you're getting is a player who finished with 18 sacks this year, 20 sacks last year. Chris, 38 sacks in 2 seasons is nothing to sneeze at 30 years old, is it?
No.
This is a guy who is everything you want, and he's the guy no one's talking about. I understand, Max, you have Cleveland saying what they're saying about not ever trading Myles Garrett. I understand that. He is a franchise player. Max Crosby is a franchise player. But Trey Hendrickson was a free agent that they signed, tried to make a Super Bowl run with, and is a notoriously cheap franchise, have no loyalty to. This is a guy who could be had with an $18 million cap hit. And then what you do is you go back and extend and restructure to make the cap hit smooth. There are options out there for Brandon Beane. And I think he needs to start thinking less like Brandon Beane of, hey, I'll draft for value and I'll try to cultivate and we'll hope that we can coach him up. No. He needs to embrace his inner Les Snead and say, fuck them picks. I want to hold a Lombardi. I want to touch it. I want to be there. I want to get a ring. I want one, and the city of Buffalo needs one. The window is closing. And I know that sounds stupid because I just talked about all the mechanisms they have to open more cap space. But the window to make moves like this, where you can afford to say, hey, fuck my 2nd round pick and this 1st round pick. I don't care. Why? Because I've already put the work in. I already jettisoned all the veterans to free up the future cap space that's going to get me my Terrell Bernard, that's going to get me my Benford, my Shakir. I have the cap space for this. What I need to go out and do is get guys who don't need to be coached up. I need to go get killers. And I bet you I can spend a first rounder and a second rounder and a first rounder next year. And over the next 2 seasons, I can amass a team that inside of a 2-year window can be an absolute wrecking ball in the NFL. Specifically on the defensive line. Maybe even go get another wide receiver. Who gives a shit at this point? Go be aggressive. Because right now, you have done the hard work, Brandon Beane. You've already done it. You set yourself up. I would be shocked if it wasn't already part of the plan. When you look at how much potential cap space we could have and all the veteran cuts we had and the way that they pared this roster down, if it wasn't 2018 all over again, where they intentionally took their medicine so they could just explode the next year and then go chase the playoffs again. Except this time they're not chasing the playoffs. They're chasing another AFC title game and breaking through that shitty glass ceiling we talked about earlier. Make no mistake, Chris. There is plenty to take away from this NFL season. Every single coach, player, there's a lot of positive things to take away from what we saw on the field this year. And now they all have their homework. Everybody who's a central figure for this football team has their homework and they know what they have to do in the offseason to be more successful next year. If Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, the 2 central figures, can do their work, who knows where this thing goes? Chris, a ship? It's not out of the question. With a roster that wasn't supposed to be competitive, we made the AFC title game. With a coach with a fresh mindset, a new set of a new discipline, a new sense of kind of trusting in his coordinators for maybe the first time in his professional career. I think this team is primed to go some places. And that's why I don't buy into the anti-coach vitriol that exists out there. It's why I don't, like I said, I said it, I feel as a dork, I'm going to say this. I feel like Aragorn in Lord of the Rings at the Black Gate. I see in your eyes the same hatred of this coach that would have me screaming into a microphone, spitting bourbon everywhere around this room. But not today. Today, I think we just opened the window to something special, and I think the fact that this team made it to this point and that they have the lessons learned in front of them, it's on them now to action it, but it's all there. It's all there for this team to take a giant step next year and be so much more than what it was here, which, Chris, if we're being honest, was a surprise, right?
Yes.
Guys, this has been a lot of fun. I love I'll tell you what, guys, I'm going to go back through the chat here. I'm going to tell you next week on our live show as we recap all the, the end of season commentary from Sean McDermott and from Brandon Beane. We're going to listen through their pressers. We're going to give you our insights on their thoughts. And as we do, I'm going to go through all these comments and I'm going to pick my favorite one. Whoever I call out, make sure you reach out to us at Rockpile Report on Twitter. DM us with your information, whether it be email, Twitter handle, however I get a hold of you so I can ship you something nice.
All right, you might see that by the next president.
Guys, this has been a lot of fun. But for tonight, we got to get out of here. I'm like, hey, who did for all that work for nothing? Spin, you're hilarious. I love that you just went to work down the roster and there's almost zero payoff for you right now. I promise I will give you a winner next week. See, it's the shtick, right? Like it's that sticky, like clickbaity kind of thing that you do if you're a hack podcaster. And that's what happens when I'm 4 glasses of whiskey and a bunch of beers deep. But I love you guys. And I love that you love us enough to show up for it tonight. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger.